Our winged lead watched over the flock of sleeping youths, her mind drifting back to a past life, reflecting on the simple instinctual nature of her kind as a brand new day began to dawn. And so she started a lesson trying her best to explain the difference between night and day. This particular lesson in basic concepts would continue well into the following day, as she patiently attempted to teach them about simple things like morning and mealtimes. But she found that teaching them was an exhausting and incredibly difficult task, forcing her to repeat the same lesson over and over again with very little actual success, as their young minds seemed to be focused only on when they would get their next meal. She vividly recalled a time before her memories returned, when she was just like them, a simple creature that was running on nothing more than pure instinct alone, until a sudden and incredibly jarring impact managed to change absolutely everything. One moment she was living a carefree existence in this strange and unfamiliar new world, and the next she felt a sudden jolt of truly overwhelming realization. A strange and unfamiliar sensation began to ripple through the young creature's mind as a hard fall from a great height triggered a massive flood of memories from a previous life, an entire lifetime of human experiences and knowledge rushing back to her all at once. But some strange power allowed for an impossible and rapid regeneration, which caused a terrible cycle of growing slightly larger only to burst apart once more. A horrifying parade of constant and incredibly painful rebirth. This gruesome and seemingly endless cycle continued for quite some time, with each new iteration becoming a desperate and frantic struggle for her own survival, until 6 long months later when the agonizing process had finally stabilized. Now she was suddenly snapped right back into the present moment, feeling the full weight of her past human life crashing down upon her once more, as she realized her previous life had ended at the very same age as these youths. She briefly wondered if her body had finally evolved to match her mind's new capacity, but a sudden and incredibly foul smell made her recoil in absolute disgust, realizing that in this world the simple act of bathing wasn't a common practice. Her sharp eyes began to scan the distant horizon, determined to find water for them all, spotting a potential location that was several kilometers away in the far distance. Her enhanced vision quickly confirmed it, a clear body of water just waiting for them. She turned back towards the youths, casually asking if they wanted to go for a swim, and to her genuine surprise, they all seemed to eagerly follow her lead. The small and happy creatures trailed along right behind her in a single file line, but one of them suddenly tripped over its own feet and fell hard to the ground. The others simply ran right past, not even seeming to notice their fallen companion, which gave her a sudden and surprisingly playful idea. She quickly scooped up the fallen youth in her arms, placing him gently on her back, her powerful legs digging deep into the earth for a massive burst of speed. She sprinted forward with incredible haste, carrying the child with exhilarating swiftness, a genuine smile spreading across her face as they all began to laugh together. She wondered if running was just an instinct for them, but she found it was actually fun. But in that happy moment, she sensed a dangerous presence, rapidly approaching them, yelling for everyone to stop immediately, as something was definitely coming their way. Strange sharp projectiles suddenly began to streak across the wide-open sky, moving far too fast for her to properly track where they were coming from. Her mind raced with possibilities, her human instincts screaming in absolute terror, but she saw the simple pattern in the attack, giving her a chance to save them all. She leaped into the air to intercept a projectile that was aimed at a nearby youth, her body moving on pure instinct, though she knew it probably wasn't strong enough. The projectile struck a small bird-like creature which cried out loudly in pain, and she could only stare in utter shock, questioning what she was even seeing. But before she could process the strange event, one of the youths brutally stomped the creature, leaving her completely stunned by their cute yet utterly ruthless nature. She recalled the moment she was reborn as a beastman, with her human mind fully intact, letting out a long, drawn-out sigh of pure and unadulterated exhaustion. The youths all gathered around her, completely oblivious, asking if it was time for a meal. Their simple questions about food quickly turned into an excited chant for their next meal, and she could only facepalm, utterly defeated by their single-minded hunger. She reflected on the fact that she was the only one who had truly grown up here, while the rest of her kind remained perpetually simple-minded like 3-year-olds. Ever since her memories had returned, she'd been trapped in endless childcare, admitting to herself that she had tried to run away from it all many times before. But the powerful and terrifying monsters of this land made any real escape impossible, and the youths often tormented weaker creatures, sometimes even poisoning themselves. Even with her impressive physical prowess, she could only handle a few foes at once, and as a group their odds of winning any given fight were actually quite low. Against much stronger opponents, their only real option was to flee for their lives. A desperate and chaotic retreat where some were inevitably left behind. This entire plateau was a demonic realm where survival itself was a daily miracle. She felt completely crushed by the constant stress of survival, and raising these children, remembering how disoriented and utterly lost she had felt in the very beginning. Now she just watched over a sleeping youth with a weary sort of fondness, quietly trying to sneak away from them all, knowing they would find her eventually. But she knew one should never underestimate the powerful instincts of her kind. She turned around in complete shock to see the youths were already awake, and watching her, realizing that her desperate attempt to sneak away had completely and utterly failed. The moment she started to run, the entire flock instinctively began to follow her lead, a chaotic and frantic chase that she couldn't seem to escape from, and the little ones just looked around confused by the sudden and unexpected sprint. She put on a massive burst of speed, trying her best to outpace them all, finally stopping to catch her breath, believing she was finally and truly alone. But their excellent eyesight meant that they found her again almost instantly. The entire flock charged directly towards her, a stampede of tiny, eager creatures, and when they encountered another group, the flock's numbers instantly began to swell. She was now surrounded by hundreds of them, a vast sea of identical little faces. Remembering how they had protected her for 6 months right after her rebirth, out of a deep sense of gratitude, she taught them how to cook, becoming their leader. She accepted her role among them, knowing that in this world their numbers were their strength, but the crushing and overwhelming loneliness made her break down in tears as she just wanted to have a real, meaningful conversation with someone. But the youths were already clamoring for their next meal, as they always were, their single-minded hunger pulling her right back to her duties as their leader. As they all ran across the vast and empty plains, once more she began to reflect on the true nature of this strange and hostile world, realizing she had never once encountered another truly intelligent being. She wished that she could use her wings to fly and search for other people, but she had learned that these wings served a very different purpose. They had evolved not for flight, but for defense and adapting to the harsh climate. She had been confused by this at first, but now she's mastered her body's unique abilities. She had to admit she'd grown accustomed to this life of endless childcare, but she often wondered if she was destined to be their leader forever. Deciding it was best not to overthink it, she resolved to simply enjoy this life until a sudden and massive disturbance caught her immediate attention. The youths running behind her stopped dead in their tracks, their eyes wide with alarm, as a massive flash of brilliant light erupted on the distant horizon. Her own eyes reflected the chaos, wondering if it was some kind of battle, and a huge cloud of dust and debris began to billow high into the sky. She speculated it was either a massive creature or a large group of people fighting. A hunt of this scale would be far too difficult for her flock to handle alone, but she saw a clear opportunity, a chance to help her kind or scavenge a kill. A predatory and excited smile spread across her face as she decided to intervene. She rallied the youths around her, telling them it was finally time to move out, leading the charge as the entire flock began to sprint right after her. While a big catch from the hunt would certainly be nice, she saw this as just another day, feeling that her monotonous routine was about to end in the next 5 minutes, the moment she would finally encounter another truly intelligent being. With a renewed sense of determination, she pushed herself to go even faster. She shouted back at the youths who were trailing behind, urging them all to keep up, and one of them looked up at her with an excited and very happy smile. Another one of them seemed confused by the sudden and unexpected change of pace, while a third looked on with just a small hint of concern in its eyes. With a fierce and determined cry, she declared that they were all going on a hunt. The entire flock stampeded across the plains right behind her in a massive wave, and the source of the distant commotion finally came into their view. Her sharp eyes locked onto the source of all the commotion, revealing a monstrous worm-like creature with a truly massive maw. She saw her own kind hunting a much smaller beast, realizing this would be an easy meal, and she immediately shouted orders for her flock to flank the much larger target. The youths eagerly charged forward, following her battle plan without any hesitation. She knew that a direct assault against the massive beast was completely out of the question, as their only real chance was to attack it from the side, and she quickly pointed out their next intended target. With a powerful and commanding cry, she told them to aim for the creature's soft body. A fierce, almost manic grin spreading widely across her face as she unleashed a devastating kick with truly incredible force. She gracefully flipped through the air right after the powerful impact, leaving the youths momentarily stunned by her incredible display of strength. But they all quickly recovered from their shock, leaping into the fray themselves, diving straight towards the beast with their own powerful and coordinated kicks. A coordinated barrage of devastating attacks rained down upon the monster, with each and every strike landing with brutal and overwhelming precision, splattering one of the nearby youths with the creature's dark, viscous blood. She watched on from a distance, ready to give new orders if the tide of battle turned, but the hunt went smoothly despite a few unexpected and minor encounters. The massive creature now lay defeated, torn apart by their relentless and brutal assault. The other half of the bisected beast desperately tried to flee the scene, but she called for her flock to regroup, their hunt now officially over. The blood-soaked youths all turned to her, their expressions blank and waiting for orders. Then they all swarmed her in a massive group hug, celebrating their victory together. The youths immediately started asking for food again, still covered in the creature's blood, but she told them they were going after the fleeing half of the monster. One of them affectionately wiped its bloody face on her clean feathers, and she smiled, picking up a youth with a renewed and determined sense of purpose. She pointed the way forward for them, rallying the others to follow her lead, telling them all to start searching the area for their next potential target. The entire flock spread out across the plains, combing through the tall grass for any sign of prey. She daydreamed about a delicious meal, hoping for something better than just earthworms, when one of the youths suddenly spotted something unusual in the distance. A wide, hopeful smile spread across her face as she decided she had to protect them, telling her flock that they had found some new friends who desperately needed their help. This exciting news sent the youths into a frenzy of pure unadulterated joy, and they began a cheerful song and dance celebrating their new companions. But her own expression turned grim, knowing that in this world survival is never easy, as she was weighed down by the burdens of leadership like food and breeding seasons. The youths remained blissfully unaware of her worries, continuing their happy littles. Until their chant suddenly stopped and she asked them what was wrong. Her eyes widened in disbelief as she saw two unconscious people lying in the grass, and her mind shattered with the realization they weren't her kind but actual humans. After 10 long and lonely years of searching, she had finally found someone else. She let out an ecstatic and joyful scream, noticing one even had long ears. She quickly apologized to a startled youth nearby, patting its head very gently, but her flock was already back to asking if it was time to eat yet. A sudden splash of some strange liquid covered the newcomers, waking them up, and the three adventurers stared in terror as she excitedly asked if they were human. The two adventurers stared in utter confusion at her sudden and wild celebration. She declared that it was a festival, telling her flock to eat as much as they wanted, and the youths immediately swarmed the monster's corpse, tearing into the raw meat. With an awkward smile on her face, she explained that they had no choice but to eat it raw. Trying to reassure the horrified elf that you eventually get used to the taste, she paused for just a moment, seeming to reconsider her own words, before pushing her flock aside to get to the monster's remains herself. She apologized to a youth as she ripped off a large piece of the beast, then leaped high into the air, carrying the offering towards the humans. She landed with a dynamic and powerful kick right in front of her new guests, the sheer force of her landing kicking up a massive cloud of dust. Beaming with pride, she offered them the bloody chunk of meat, saying the inside was clean. The adventurers recoiled in terror, politely declining the gruesome-looking meal. Her face fell with disappointment as she realized civilized people wouldn't eat something like this. But one of the youths looked up from the ground, eagerly eyeing the rejected food, and immediately started gnawing on the raw flesh while she was still holding it. The lead adventurer finally asked the most important question: who exactly was she? She proudly introduced herself to them as the leader of this entire flock. This simple act of conversation completely overwhelmed her, bringing her to tears of joy, and her flock rushed over to her side, concerned by her sudden crying. She told her youths not to attack them, explaining that these were their new friends. She then introduced the concept of friends to her curious and attentive flock, who immediately swarmed the adventurers to investigate their new companions. One of them got uncomfortably close to the elf, sniffing her very curiously. The leader panicked, shouting at her flock not to lick their new friends. One of the youths affectionately nuzzled the elf's cheek, making her blush slightly, and the leader panicked again, apologizing profusely for her flock's overly friendly behavior. But the elf warned her not to harm the youth, or she would have to kill them all. Interrupting the tense moment, the leader decided to properly introduce her kind, explaining that this was the first real conversation she had had in many years. When they asked for her name, she admitted that she had never actually needed one before, and the adventure leader smiled, wanting to thank her for the timely rescue. She brushed off his thanks with a wave, but then a new idea sparked in her mind as she eagerly asked where they came from, desperate to learn about the outside world. The adventurer introduced himself as Claudius, a party leader from a northern empire. She was absolutely ecstatic, recognizing adventurers as a classic staple of other worlds. Claudius explained they were on a survey mission when they got lost and were attacked, and she laughed out loud, realizing just how lucky the three of them were to survive. The second adventurer, Zad, introduced himself as a quarter dwarf scout, explaining the size difference between races, which she found to be incredibly fascinating. Finally, the elf Amelia was introduced as their mage, still being smothered by a youth, and Amelia glared at her silently, asking how to get this child off of her. The leader explained this one was particularly clingy and must really like Amelia's scent. She called out to the youth by its side, getting its attention with a single word. She suggested that Amelia was feeling dirty and probably needed to wash up, prompting the youth to lead the elf away towards a nearby water source. The small creature tugged on Amelia's clothes, urging her to follow along, leaving the elf confused but following along with the persistent little youth. Amelia finally agreed that she would go wash up, asking for some water from the child. But when they got to the water's edge, she gently began to clean the youth's face instead. Claudius asked what he should call their leader, since she didn't seem to have a name, and she brightly decided on Rise, a name she remembered from her old world, prompting the adventurers to formally thank Rise for saving their lives. Claudius held one of the youths in his arms, both of them looking on peacefully. And Rise smiled, accepting their serious gratitude before changing the subject. She closed her eyes for just a moment, taking some time to gather her thoughts, then opened them again, ready to ask Claudius a question as leader of the flock. He asked how his party would be treated while in her flock's territory, and Rise explained her most important duty was to protect her own kind. She considered the possibility that humans might treat them as slaves or as livestock, realizing that if they posed a threat, she would have to eliminate them right here. One of the youths asked what would happen if the newcomers became a problem, so Rise asked her flock if they should be treated as humans or as monsters. She weighed her own desire for civilization against the potential risk to her family, then stared down at Claudius with a terrifying intensity, demanding an answer. Both Claudius and Zad were frozen in fear by her sudden and menacing aura, and even the small youth in Claudius's arms looked up at her in absolute terror. The little one hid its face in his shoulder, trembling from the sheer pressure. as other youths in the background began to cower in fear as well. The entire flock gathered behind her, all of them hiding their faces in fear, and Rise's eyes widened as she realized she was scaring her own children. The youth stared back at her, their expressions filled with pure, unadulterated fear, while the three adventurers were completely paralyzed by her overwhelming presence. Claudius began to sweat, feeling the weight of her intent crushing down on him, knowing he must choose his next words with perfect honesty, or they would all die. Her eyes were wide with a terrifying intensity awaiting his crucial answer, and Claudius was frozen in place, sweating under the immense weight of her question. He clenched his fist tightly, promising to treat them as fellow humans, but he hesitated for a moment, adding a single dangerous word. However, Rise narrowed her eyes at him, questioning his sudden and ominous pause. He nervously explained that discrimination between the different races was a major issue. On the southern continent, many diverse races live together in multi-ethnic nations, and the state generally considers any bipedal sentient being as humanoid. This particular ideology originated from the Empire, a human-centric power on both continents. For hundreds of years, the Empire had fought brutal wars against many other races, though there were also periods of peace and strong alliances with non-humans, until an emperor 8 generations ago declared a new policy of human supremacy. He explained that since humans have short lifespans, old hatreds faded, and discrimination is now banned. Their religion teaches that God made them in his image and also gave them language, so any creature that can speak cannot possibly be judged as a simple monster. Rise understood the situation, noting the high chance of being dragged into racial conflicts. She simply said, "I see," as she processed all of the complicated information. With a small smile, she said it was valuable information to know they'd be seen as people. Claudius stared back at her, still sweating from the incredibly intense interrogation. Rise then asked for a bit more of his time as new questions had come to her mind. He quickly agreed to her request, still visibly shaken but willing to cooperate. She took a quiet moment for herself, absorbing everything she had just learned. Then her menacing aura completely vanished, replaced by a bright, cheerful smile, and she thanked him for the talk, apologizing for being so intense and scaring him. Claudius could only manage a flustered and very relieved sigh in response. Claudius awkwardly waved off her apology for being so incredibly scary. But Rise was already lost in thought, processing all of the new information. She was completely overwhelmed by concepts like nations, races, and even religion, realizing she couldn't judge their entire world based on just one person's story. She suddenly turned to Claudius with a bright smile on her face, startling him, and offered to guide them back to civilization, much to their genuine surprise. Rise explained that she was desperate to see the civilized world for herself, and believed the journey would be a valuable experience for her entire flock. They agreed on a deal: she would be their guide and they would be her escorts. The adventurers were visibly relieved by this, the heavy tension finally broken. Rise recalled that outside the Empire, the continent was a patchwork of warring states, a chaotic era where smaller nations constantly fought for power and for land. A new and very ambitious idea began to form in the back of her mind. Claudius continued explaining their difficult situation to her in more detail, mentioning their guild was strong enough to handle extremely dangerous quests. Rise realized this meant her flock could potentially work as mercenaries for a living, though she worried about their wild nature as they often go berserk while hunting. She would need to teach them not to eat valuable monster parts or even people. She knew that there would be many difficult challenges waiting for them ahead, but the thought of earning money for civilized food filled her with a new hope. She daydreamed about exploring new towns and experiencing a brand new culture, her face beaming with pure excitement for the future that was ahead of them. Then a new thought suddenly crossed her mind as she looked at her flock, and she turned to Amelia, who was still holding the sleeping little youth. Rise noted how attached the little one had become, likely forgetting it was even there. Amelia gently patted the head of the little one, sleeping soundly in her arms, and the youth smiled in its sleep, enjoying the pleasant scent all around it. But Amelia glanced over at Rise, noticing something odd about her flock. She asked if their numbers had grown, as the crowd of youth seemed much larger now, and Rise cheerfully confirmed it, pointing out a new face right beside her. She explained that her kind naturally gathers in groups of a few dozen for safety, leaving Amelia completely stunned by this sudden and unexpected population boom. It was a powerful survival instinct, as Rise knew smaller groups were easily wiped out, so she made it a rule to accept any and all stragglers she happened to find. Rise proudly told Amelia that no matter how many there were, they never fought, then decided to name the youth Dara, telling Amelia to take it for a bath. This simple, caring interaction reminded Rise of when she first regained her memories, but Amelia's expression turned serious as she considered their upcoming journey. She asked Rise if she was truly certain about taking them all to a human town. Rise turned back to face her, confused by the elf's sudden and serious question. And Amelia warned her that people aren't as pure as she might imagine them to be. She looked at the innocent youths, thinking about how young and naive they all were, suggesting it might be better for them to live happily here away from human malice. Rise closed her eyes for a moment, admitting she understood Amelia's point of view, but a determined look crossed her face as she prepared to give her response, her eyes shining with resolve as she declared they don't know that world yet. It could be a much better environment for them, and she refused to deny them that chance. Amelia listened to her words, her expression softening as she understood Rise's conviction. Rise explained that while her flock is weak, they're fast enough to escape any danger, and from what she had heard, anywhere is a better environment than this plateau. Amelia began to sweat, doubting that such powerful monsters could even exist here, while Rise reassured her flock, telling them not to worry about her serious face. She explained this plateau has more enemies than she can count on both of her hands, leaving Amelia completely stunned by the sheer number of potential threats. Rise revealed the most troublesome of them all are the Baikubiku, causing her flock to tremble, and the youths began to cry out the name of the beast in absolute terror. They cowered in fear at her feet, the mere mention of the name paralyzing them. And Rise realized she had accidentally terrified her own children once again. She quickly tried to calm them all down, promising there were no enemies around, but the little ones were still crying, needing much more reassurance from her. Amelia comforted a nearby youth, telling Rise she shouldn't have said that name. Rise then described the monster, a massive lightning-wielding dragon. In a flashback, she recalled how their first encounter had decimated her flock, as one of the youths bravely, but foolishly charged straight at the beast, its attack barely scratching the dragon's electrified and hardened scales. Their natural defenses were completely useless against its powerful lightning armor, forcing Rise to scream at her flock, ordering a full and immediate retreat. This terrifying beast was actually a three-headed Hydra, an impossible foe, and all they could do was hide, trembling in fear behind a large rock wall. She explained they've encountered it many times but could only ever run away. Worse, the dragons reproduce quickly, forcing them to destroy any nests on sight. Rise added with a smirk that at least their eggs were quite delicious. In another memory, she attacked a dragon head-on to buy her flock some time, but her claws shattered against its impenetrable and tough hide, though she grimly recalled that she still managed to get her revenge. She recalled gouging out the dragon's eye with her own bare hands, saying its defenses were so strong she never wants to face it again. She explained the name, Baikubiku, comes from how it convulses when it dies, leaving Amelia horrified, realizing this was far beyond an elder dragon's power. She stared in disbelief at the story, muttering that this plateau is basically hell. But Rise just gave a serene, almost innocent smile in response, explaining that a safe place is something she has desperately wanted for them. Amelia asked if she really just tanked a lightning attack from that beast, and Rise casually confirmed that she did, much to Amelia's utter disbelief. Amelia realized that Rise possessed an inhuman amount of magical power, and then her attention turned to the single feather that Rise wore. It was an artifact with insane resistances to multiple different elements, an item so valuable it could make a craftsman's entire career. While Rise was certainly strong, Amelia worried the innocent youths would be exploited, remembering the horrors her own people had faced at the hands of others. She resolved to protect them all, hoping a brighter world awaited them, but her smile was strained, hiding her deep-seated anxieties about the future. She told the little one in her arms they just needed to hang on a bit longer. Several weeks later, the adventurers were preparing for the long journey, and Zad asked Rise if she was sure about going to town dressed like that. He joked that with Amelia gone, he might forget some important things, and Rise explained her feathers were too useful to be replaced by simple clothes. Zad considered this for a moment, figuring it was probably not a big deal. After all, some beastmen in his own homeland wear very little clothing. But he imagined the town's reaction, a massive crowd of perverts descending on them. Zad groaned, realizing her flock would attract a whole different kind of attention. Rise just tilted her head to the side, completely oblivious to his concerns, and Zad gave a worried glance at her and the rest of the youths. His fears were confirmed as Claudius spotted the youths devouring a humanoid monster, but Rise cheerfully explained they'll eat anything and orcs are a delicacy here. Zad remembered his earlier excitement about finding some proper food for them. Just as Rise announced to her hungry flock that it was finally time to eat, Zad quickly volunteered to find them some more acceptable monster meat. He headed off into the woods, determined to find them all a proper meal, using his spyglass to scout the surrounding area from a safe distance, and he immediately spotted a large settlement of orcs in the valley below. He rushed back to Rise as fast as he could, looking completely panicked, trying to explain to her that he had found a very serious problem. He reported to Claudius that an orc horde of over 200 was nearby. A threat far too big to ignore, so Claudius asked Rise for her help. Rise perked up at the mere mention of orcs, a thoughtful look on her face, her dazed expression making the adventurers incredibly nervous. And Claudius began to sweat, wondering if he had made a huge mistake. But Rise's face lit up as she eagerly accepted the quest for some piggy meat. Her flock immediately leaped into action, overwhelming the orcs with incredible ease. Rise herself tore through 3 enemies in a single devastating motion. But once the battle was over, the youths just stared at the fallen orcs, before they all began to feast on the bodies, much to Zad's absolute horror. Rise admitted that she once found this kind of behavior repulsive as well, but on this plateau the rule is simple: you either eat or you are eaten. Zad was left completely speechless by her incredibly casual admission, as Rise explained that her flock has a very strong sense of kinship, but to their enemies they would show absolutely no mercy at all, cheerfully declaring that anyone outside their tribe was just a meal candidate. Amelia added they would never hurt their own, and Rise agreed Amelia was safe, while one of the youths even showed an innocent curiosity towards Zad, leaving him to sweat with relief as Rise promised she would intervene if needed. With their meal finally finished, Rise announced it was time to wash up at the river, and so this entire group adventurers and flock alike finally began their journey. Claudius soon spotted a familiar signpost, a wide smile crossing his face. As he announced they were on a familiar road and would be arriving soon. Suddenly, two of the youths cried out in alarm, pointing at something massive ahead, leaving Rise, and the little one stunned. It was visible from so far away. She explained to them that the massive structure was actually a castle wall, telling her flock that many humans lived inside and they must be friendly. Hearing this, the little ones all cheered in enthusiastic and happy agreement, and Rise smiled, knowing they'd likely forget, but hoping the lesson would stick. She then asked Claudius if this place was his home, and he happily confirmed it, proudly introducing their destination as his very own hometown of Plake. It was a frontier town that thrived on monster materials from the plateau, making it the perfect place to sell that certain item for a huge profit. Rise looked on with a hint of uncertainty in her eyes, hoping he was right, knowing that certain item was their collection of valuable monster parts, a horde of dragon fangs, and the proof of their orc subjugation. But the adventurers were already worried about how to feed this massive flock, so Claudius explained there was a nearby granary where they could buy cheap food. But the youths were already feasting on crops from a nearby field, and Rise decided they should just enjoy the town of Plake for now. This entire group continued their chaotic march toward the city gates, prompting both Amelia and Zad to look ahead with growing concern. Amelia's eyes suddenly widened in alarm as the city guards on the wall began to panic at the massive crowd approaching. Amelia said someone needed to go ahead, and Zad immediately volunteered for the task, so Rise thanked him, telling the others they would wait for his return, and she ordered her entire flock to sit down and rest by the side of the road. She then tried discussing their reward money with a very nervous Zad, who seemed completely overwhelmed by the rapidly unfolding situation. Meanwhile, one of the youths began showing great affection for Amelia, forcing Rise to scold another for wandering too far away from the group. This first youth continued showering a flustered Amelia with innocent kisses, while Rise watched them with a suddenly stern and focused expression. Just then Zad returned to them, shouting for Claudius and Rise from afar, and his arrival immediately captured the attention of all the curious youths as he presented a female knight who was riding a magnificent white horse. The little ones were instantly mesmerized by the beautiful and majestic animal, and the knight smiled warmly, welcoming the travelers to their destination. But Rise stammered an apology, asking her to please move the horse away because her flock was staring at the creature with hungry, predatory eyes. Rise frantically yelled that the horse was not food as the knight started to panic, and she scolded her children for disobeying her direct order to stay put. The knight apologized for startling them, but Rise explained it was their first time seeing a horse. Rise then cleared her throat, her expression suddenly becoming much more serious. As the knight formally introduced herself as Matilda, the guardian of Plake, Amelia was stunned by her high rank, wondering how Zad managed to bring her here, but Zad just scratched his head, sheepishly downplaying his role in the meeting. Rise then introduced herself as the chief of her Ostrich-type beastman tribe, leaving Matilda confused when Rise mentioned they were just here to play. Rise clarified they could only travel as a large group, so they were sightseeing. Matilda then brought up what Zad had told her, that they might be looking to immigrate, and Rise looked surprised that Zad revealed so much, but he gave a confident thumbs up. She explained that if the town was welcoming, they'd be happy with land outside the walls. Matilda considered this proposition carefully, her expression unreadable and calculating, until a small smile crossed her face as she seemed to understand their situation. Rise sensed a strong will behind the knight's eyes, realizing she wasn't letting her guard down. But Matilda's attention wasn't just on Rise and her words, it was on the overwhelming power of the flock standing right behind her. The knight closed her eyes for a moment, stating that she understood their request, having already heard from Zad about their incredible combat prowess on the road. She admitted that having them would be a huge boost to the town's strength and population. However, there was a catch to her otherwise generous offer, as she revealed that the political situation with neighboring countries was tense. Because of this, she must first confirm if they were truly trustworthy allies, and she reached for a weapon from one of her guards, her intent becoming clear. The guard looked on in shock as she took his spear from his hands, and she challenged Rise to a duel right there to prove her worth. Rise's face lit up with a feral grin, absolutely thrilled by the challenge, but the youths immediately misinterpreted the duel as a hunt, shouting to attack, forcing Rise to frantically calm her flock, telling them it wasn't a real fight. She tried to reframe it as a game, asking who wanted to be the best-behaved child, and the little ones instantly sat down, looking up at her with innocent eyes. The adventurers pitched in as well, helping to soothe the excited and confused youths, and two of the children beamed with joy as they received affectionate head pats. But Matilda was furious, demanding that Rise take this test of strength seriously, and Rise panicked, realizing her flock didn't understand the knight's intentions. As her sudden outburst left the youths looking absolutely terrified, she yelled at them to sit, insisting that Matilda wasn't an enemy to be feared, and the knight looked on awkwardly, realizing she may have misjudged the situation. Rise quickly reassured her flock, telling them to be more careful next time. Meanwhile, Amelia happily doted on two of the now calm children as Rise promised rewards for all the youths who behaved themselves. Claudius got swarmed by an affectionate youth looking completely overwhelmed. And even Zad was roped into giving out some very awkward head pats. With the entire flock now settled and content, the tension finally eased, and Matilda asked if Rise was finally ready to begin their duel. Rise thanked Amelia and the others for helping manage her massive family, then turned to Matilda apologizing for the delay and the scare, but gave a chilling warning about what happens if her friends are attacked. She explained that once her flock starts, even she has trouble stopping them. So Matilda took the threat seriously, promising to inform her own soldiers. Rise's talons dug into the earth, ready to begin the fight at last. Rise closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath to focus her mind, then grinned wildly, ready for what she called a fierce but friendly match. With a challenging smile on her face, she asked Matilda if they could begin, thinking how she had only ever fought with brute strength before, but this warrior in front of her was clearly a master of her craft. Rise decided she would test the knight's skills first, a sly look on her face, while Matilda narrowed her eyes, sensing the shift in the air. Without any warning, the knight lunged forward with blinding speed, her spear stopping just inches from Rise's face, who was shocked by the velocity. Matilda's eyes were filled with a fierce, unwavering determination, the spear tip aimed directly at Rise's vulnerable eye, but Rise caught the spear shaft between her teeth, stopping it cold. The knight gasped in disbelief at this, preparing for her next move. As both combatants blurred into a flurry of motion, dodging and weaving, Matilda was stunned by Rise's fluid attacks aimed at her vital points, but she managed to keep her composure, staying one step ahead of the beastmen. They broke apart for a moment, each one analyzing the other's movements and adapting, and Rise was impressed, realizing Matilda was using skill to wear her down, forcing Rise to leap over a powerful sweeping strike from the spear. She admitted she knew nothing of martial arts, but she could feel the knight's dedication. Matilda saw an opening and shouted, thrusting her spear forward once again, only for Rise to block it effortlessly with her feathered arm. A confident smile spread across the beastman chief's face, knowing that a difference in raw power could still be overcome, and she closed the distance, putting the armored knight on the defensive. Matilda strained against the spear, unable to free it from Rise's powerful bite, wondering if she had pushed too hard, completely misjudging the situation. The knight reset her stance, preparing for the next exchange. But a nervous sweat broke out as she accepted the beastman's incredible power. Rise grinned with pure delight, announcing that it was finally her turn to attack. She explained her attacks lacked any formal technique, born only from raw instinct, and she carefully blocked the spear with her leg, holding back to avoid breaking it. A small, confident smile played on her lips as she controlled the fight's pace, while Matilda desperately tried to land a blow, urging her to fight seriously. Rise just laughed, admitting this was her first non-lethal fight ever, recalling her friendly conversations with the adventurers, a new experience for her. She realized this duel was a true conversation spoken through their bodies, and the Beastman chief wished this thrilling exchange could last forever, but she knew she couldn't keep playing around for much longer. Matilda sensed the shift in her opponent, realizing she couldn't let Rise get any more excited. With a single hand, Rise effortlessly stopped the knight's spear mid-thrust, and she then casually tossed the weapon aside, disarming her opponent completely, and in a flash she was at Matilda's throat, declaring the match was over. Her fierce expression softened as she immediately asked if the knight was all right, while the city guards could only stare in disbelief at their leader's swift defeat. But Matilda was beaming with a smile, thanking Rise for the incredible duel, and Rise blushed, overjoyed by the knight's positive reaction to their fight. Suddenly a thought struck her, and her happy expression vanished. As she panicked, realizing she completely forgot to check on her children, she turned to find her entire flock sitting perfectly, looking on with awe, and the youths looked up in confusion, asking their mother what was wrong. One of them innocently asked if it was time to eat now, sending Matilda into a state of absolute terrified shock, as Rise frantically explained that Matilda was a friend, not their next meal. But the children still didn't understand the concept of a non-lethal fight. And Matilda finally got it. For them, the loser of a fight becomes food. Rise sternly warned her flock not to attack or try to eat anyone, which immediately caused two of the youths to burst into tears. Rise quickly apologized for her tone, reassuring them that she wasn't angry with them now. Matilda couldn't help but laugh out loud, finding the entire situation incredibly amusing, and her sudden laughter left Rise completely flustered and confused. The knight said she'd love to stay, but duty was calling her back to the city. As her guards in the background breathed a collective sigh of relief, Rise then turned to her children, telling them to say goodbye to Matilda, teaching them to wave when parting with new friends, a foreign concept, as leaving someone behind on the plains usually meant certain death. The little ones looked up, trying to grasp the meaning of bye-bye, and Matilda waved from horseback, wishing them well as the flock waved back. As they rode away, one of her guards asked if she was truly all right, expressing concern not for Rise but for the rest of her powerful flock. The other guards looked on, still sweating from the sheer intimidation, and Matilda sharply rebuked him, asking if he had a death wish. The guard apologized but admitted he understood the underlying fear, while Matilda clutched her arm, the memory of Rise's grip still fresh, realizing that Rise and her entire flock possessed unimaginable power. Matilda understood that their lack of control made them incredibly dangerous. But she also recalled the children's innocent eyes, which reflect everything, for if you show them hostility, they will bring nothing but utter destruction, yet, if you welcome them with open arms, they return the kindness tenfold. She remembered the duel feeling like she was fighting a literal giant, and the immense weight she felt the very first time their weapons clashed. Rise's expression wasn't one of malice, but almost of apology for her own strength, and Matilda smiled, realizing that unlike most powerful people, Rise was genuinely good. A sudden thought struck the Knight Commander with startling clarity, and she whirled around, ordering her men to never harm Rise's flock. The guards snapped to attention, immediately acknowledging her command, and Matilda now considered their future, wondering if they could settle nearby, her mind racing with the strategic implications of this new development. She knew this world had beings with the power of monsters, individuals who were classified as special military assets for their overwhelming might. Matilda shuddered, thinking how Rise could wipe out soldiers with a single swing, and she panicked, realizing if they became enemies, they could destroy the entire country. The Knight Commander was completely overwhelmed by this terrifying thought, and she quickly tried to regain her composure after her brief outburst. Most nations had at least one such asset, but her own country had none until now, as she realized Rise's entire flock was a force of nature. Her new plan was simple: earn their trust and make them love this country. Because if they lived here, they couldn't be used by other nations against them. With her path now clear, Matilda's resolve hardened into cold steel, and she rode off to report to the king, already planning their food and lodging. Matilda suddenly turned back on her horse, shouting to her men, and one of her guards looked up, trying to explain the commotion, reporting that Rise's entire flock was crying in the middle of the road. The Knight Commander was speechless, realizing they were apologizing to the townspeople. Meanwhile, back in the city, a merchant called out to Rise's group, offering to sell them the latest maps of the entire continent. Rise was immediately intrigued by the offer, wanting to understand this new world's layout, so the blonde adventurer offered to watch her children while she looked, and she gratefully accepted, telling her flock to stay put for a moment. She excitedly asked the merchant to show her what he had available, and as she unrolled a large map, her eyes sparkled with curiosity. But her expression instantly shifted to one of pure, unadulterated shock. A cold sweat broke out as she recognized the unmistakable shape of Italy, and she looked at another section, seeing a continent identical to Africa. A memory flashed of a goddess explaining she created this world by copying Earth, and the elf adventurer Amelia noticed her friend was frozen in place, quietly asking if this world was somehow called Earth. The merchant just laughed, explaining a myth about a goddess creating land with a sneeze. So Rise forced a smile, saying the familiar geography would just make things easier. She decided to keep this revelation to herself, seeing how much they revere their goddess. Suddenly, the adventurer cried out, completely overwhelmed by her curious children, as the little ones were absolutely mesmerized by all the new sights around them. Rise smiled, realizing they were just overexcited by their first trip to a city, and she knew she'd have to be extra vigilant to keep them from causing trouble. She pointed to a building, explaining to her flock that it was a house for humans, and one of the youths pointed to a cow, excitedly asking if it was their next meal, while another child tugged on her wing, pointing at something new with wide eyes. She had spotted a bald man, innocently calling him Bald Uncle, and the other children immediately picked up the word, chanting it with glee. The man just smiled, strangely pleased by the sudden attention, as Rise frantically tried to apologize, while her flock continued their new favorite chant. She ordered them to stop, but one of them had already grabbed the man's shirt, revealing an incredibly hairy chest that surprised even the child. Rise shouted at the youth, telling them not to wander off on their own, and she quickly apologized to the now crying man as she pulled her child back. Spreading her wings wide, Rise called for her entire flock to assemble immediately, and she took a deep breath, doing a quick headcount to ensure everyone was there. With everyone gathered, she decided they would head to the Adventurers Guild. But she instantly realized two of her children had already vanished from the group. The adventurers struggled to wrangle the kids, who were distracted by everything, and the blonde adventurer explained they weren't used to being separated from her. The children ran free instinctively, knowing there were no enemies to fear here, and Rise laughed, admitting that hurting them was far more difficult than she expected. While she was happy they were stimulated by new things, it was also exhausting, as she was completely worn out from constantly checking to see if anyone was missing. Amelia suddenly called out to Rise, telling her to come and see something, where one of the little girls was staring intently at a beautiful piece of jewelry. The elf adventurer explained that the child seemed absolutely captivated by the accessory, and Amelia smiled, noting that the little one had been staring at it dreamily. An elderly shopkeeper looked on warmly, calling the young girl adorable. And Rise watched the peaceful scene, feeling a sense of warmth and healing, suddenly realizing her children had their own strong personalities, overcome with emotion at how much they had truly grown. But the little one suddenly stopped, her expression shifting completely as her eyes locked onto the jewelry with the instinct of a hunter. Rise and Amelia screamed in panic, trying to stop her from eating it, a chaotic memory of apologies and near disaster flashing before her eyes. The adventurers decided it was best to leave before causing more trouble. Just as the entire flock announced that they were hungry, one of the youths wandered off, spotting a potential snack nearby, and a kind man turned to see the children staring at him curiously. Rise's eyes widened in absolute terror at what might happen next, but the little one stopped a thought crossing her mind. She remembered her mother's stern warning, humans are friends not food, and with a determined huff she resisted her primal instincts as the entire group of children suddenly ran away from the confused man. Their escape was cut short when one of them spotted something incredible, a market stall piled high with shiny, delicious-looking fruit. The child's eyes sparkled with wonder, completely mesmerized by the sight, and a faint memory surfaced of Rise telling them about edible things from trees, followed by another much clearer rule: never take what isn't yours. The children's faces fell as they sadly apologized to no one in particular, and one of them puffed out her cheeks, determined to follow the rules. As the whole group gathered to stare longingly at the fruit with teary eyes, the vendor simply laughed, amused by how much they seemed to want his fruit, boasting that his magically enhanced fruit was the best in town, and he generously offered to let each of the children have one for free. The little ones were stunned, barely believing they could really take one, but the vendor just smiled, calling it a special treat for his new customers. Their faces immediately lit up with pure, unadulterated joy. And he gave a thumbs up, telling them to eat as much as they like. With a happy cry, the entire flock leaped into the air, wings flapping, but the man's smile froze, completely unprepared for their reaction. He screamed in terror as the children dive-bombed his entire stall, and Rise and her companions whirled around at the sudden commotion, witnessing a chaotic explosion of fruit and feathers everywhere. She screamed at the top of her lungs, ordering them to stop immediately, but her children were lost in a frenzy, stuffing their faces with the fruit. They sat happily in the baskets, completely ignoring their mother's commands, until suddenly one of the youths froze mid-bite, a thought striking her as a cold sweat dripped down her face, realizing her terrible mistake. Her eyes widened in absolute horror as she looked up from the basket, a terrifying memory of Rise's authority flashing through her mind. The entire group of children recoiled in sudden, abject fear, and even the vendor was terrified by the demonic image he saw in their eyes. Rise furiously reminded them that this was merchandise, and not to be eaten freely, leaving the poor vendor stammering, completely overwhelmed by the chaos. Her children burst into tears, wailing apologies for their behavior, but she told them to apologize to the shopkeeper, not to her. The scene then cuts away, showing the group continuing their journey, with Rise sitting, utterly exhausted, her flock sleeping soundly after their first city trip. She sighed, admitting it was her own fault for not being able to control them. As a flashback showed Matilda's soldiers helping to clean up the chaotic aftermath, while the adventurers scrambled to collect money from others to pay for the damages. Rise had to profusely apologize, promising the vendor he would be fully compensated, but the poor man was left completely stunned by the sudden, overwhelming assault. He quickly recovered, however, laughing it off as a free sample that saved him work. The townspeople were surprisingly kind, with one woman even comforting Rise. And Rise reflected that this harsh world has forced her to become much stronger. Her expression hardened with a newfound sense of grim determination, for though her children were simple, they couldn't learn everything all at once. One of them even understood that food is a vital word for survival, and she knew that certain triggers could help them recall important lessons, especially those taught with a strong, unforgettable impact. This is why she must be strict, teaching them right from wrong without hesitation, as she has to instill in them the very standards of being a person in this world. A divine law was explained: language is what separates people from monsters, and she realized with chilling clarity that her flock could have been hunted as beasts. Looking at her repentant children, she resolved to give them more experience, wanting them to have the power to choose where and how they live, a desire that may be selfish, but was also her duty as their leader. A small, confident smile appeared on her face as she made this vow. Back in the present, she sighed, thinking maybe the trip was too soon after all, but she shook her head, deciding there was no point in overthinking what's already done. She then noticed her children were all crying softly in their sleep, so Rise called for her children to gather around her, but they could only whimper apologies, feeling like they were bad kids. She looked down at them, not with anger but with a gentle smile, and she warmly reassured them that she was not mad anymore. The little ones looked up with teary eyes, asking if she really meant it, and she encouraged them to cheer up, welcoming them closer with a smile. They confessed their greatest fear was being abandoned by her and the flock, a harsh memory surfacing: survival in the wild is impossible alone. Rise reminded them that they've helped her just as much as she's helped them, and she promised she would never ever abandon them now. She vowed to always look after them and teach them what they need to know. Then asked if any of them actually understood the lesson this time. One of the children tearfully confessed that they ate all the fruit, and Rise's eyes suddenly sparkled with a brilliant realization, knowing the lesson was properly learned and stored away in their minds. She thought to herself that there was a bit more to it than just that. Just then the adventurers returned, calling out to Rise from a distance, and the blonde adventurer announced he had brought a guild staff member along. Rise was shocked by this, wondering why a guild official came all this way. A cheerful guild employee introduced themselves as the one assessing her case, noting that appearances can be deceiving, which was quite fast. Rise was completely flustered by the suddenness of it all, barely managing to respond. The official confirmed the orc materials and explained the payment process, but then they paused, mentioning a ground dragon that caused a delay as Amelia revealed a huge glowing crystal that could be worth a fortune. The guild official grabbed Rise's wing, insisting they absolutely must buy the material, gushing about the romance of discovery, while Rise thought they were going to get killed. The other adventurers laughed as their companion looked sick, recalling his own near-death experience. The official explained that the crystal could be used to create exceptionally powerful gear, but the real issue was determining its incredible price. Since it was a new material, a proper appraisal was difficult and shady dealers would cheat them. So the guild's plan was to auction it off, but that could take a very long time. So the official had come with a special proposal for them today. Rise was handed a document shocked that she could read and understand it perfectly, and the deal was explained. The guild would pay a minimum price now and the rest after auction. They pointed out this was a win-win since Rise's party seemed to need cash quickly. Rise was completely stunned to hear the minimum price was enough to buy a house. And her companions were ecstatic, realizing this was an incredible offer. With a bright smile, Rise agreed to the terms without any hesitation, and the official thanked her profusely, grabbing her wing again to seal the deal. She held the official paperwork in her hands, which detailed the entire transaction, and with a cheerful wave, the guild employee ran off to finalize everything. Rise thought the official was a bit odd, but was relieved to have secured the funds. And one of her children pointed to the paper, so Rise asked if they were curious about it. She explained it was proof of an exchange, trading one thing for money, and the children looked down in shame, apologizing again for their earlier mistakes. But Rise just smiled warmly, reassuring them that she wasn't angry anymore. The entire flock gathered around her under the shade of a large tree, and she held them close, thinking they were probably older than her but still so sweet. With a sly grin, she mused that it was a good thing they were small for their age, so overwhelmed by their affection that she felt her mind might just break. But as she rested among them, a sudden thought came to her mind, recalling the map, finally understanding their location in the world. The further south they were, the more godlike monsters they encountered, but here in the north her children could finally relax in peace. Rise watched them play for a moment, thinking they were just as adorable as ever. And she turned to Amelia, playfully asking if she wanted to join in the fun. Meanwhile, one of the little ones lay on the ground looking utterly dejected, whimpering sadly, asking if it wasn't allowed to be happy. Amelia asked if that was one of the children who caused the fruit stand incident, and Rise explained that the entire flock had been in apology mode all day long. And while their remorse was cute, it was also making her feel incredibly guilty, until a small knowing smile began to form on her lips. As Amelia patted her head, calling her mom and praising her hard work, Rise's eyes widened in absolute unadulterated shock at being called that, and she furiously denied being their mother, shouting that everyone keeps saying it. She panicked, explaining she's never had a partner and they all hatched from eggs, and this shocking revelation left the entire adventuring party completely stunned. Amelia stammered, admitting she thought it was a queen bee situation, while the others chimed in asking if none of the children were actually hers. Rise just laughed, admitting she's never even been in heat or found a mate, and then revealed that her children are already adults ready to lay eggs soon. The adventurers were floored again as she added they'll probably outlive her, clarifying that she doesn't actually know her own exact age. Changing the subject with a bright smile, she asked what they came here for. The blonde adventurer tried to properly thank Rise for everything she had done, saying that his party was the one who should be grateful for her help, and explaining that this was precisely why they had come all this way, only to get a face full of her incredibly soft and fluffy wing, which left him blushing, completely stunned by the gentle texture. Rise just laughed warmly, telling him she gladly accepted his gratitude. And he then asked what her plans were now that she had the money, so she explained they would stay outside town for a while to observe, noting that her children were learning new words just by listening to them, because here they had so many more opportunities to grow and learn. She then asked if the adventurers would come visit her children again sometime, adding with a slight blush that they should come visit her as well. The entire party agreed to her request with huge enthusiastic smiles, causing Rise's eyes to well up with gratitude as she thanked them, her face breaking into a genuinely happy and beaming smile. Suddenly getting an idea, she offered to treat everyone to dinner tonight, though she sheepishly admitted she would need their help with the shopping. And Amelia immediately volunteered to handle all the food preparation herself, which shocked the others, who suggested Rise should be the taste tester instead. But Rise just laughed, saying she was used to eating strange things. Amelia decided they would need to find a merchant to buy ingredients from when a shadowy figure suddenly appeared behind her, asking if he was called, causing one of Rise's children to recoil in absolute instinctual terror, while the others gasped, completely startled by his sudden arrival. Rise was stunned, wondering how this man appeared without her sensing him at all. The mysterious man approached them with a disarmingly friendly smile and introduced himself as Alan, a merchant working for a Lady Matilda, explaining that he heard new soldiers were setting up camp in the area, as one of the adventurers marveled at the massive tent he had brought. Alan smoothly boasted that his specialty was providing food supplies for large groups, a statement which immediately put Rise on guard as she shielded her child. He gestured to her flock, saying their arrival would boost the town's food sales, a comment that left Amelia feeling completely flustered and embarrassed. One of the little ones suddenly scooped Amelia up and carried her away just as Alan explained he was already making preparations for their group, and he gave a sly smile, asking if they would allow him to handle their needs. Rise glared at him with deep suspicion, wondering what this man was really after, as her children were visibly terrified, sensing something was very wrong with him. And she realized he must have incredible hearing to have appeared so quickly. But there was something else about him that was setting off her alarm bells as the man's friendly smile never wavered, adding to the growing tension. The blonde adventurer watched him with a guarded and untrusting expression, while Cruel looked on equally unsettled by the merchant's sudden appearance. Amelia whispered that it seemed even the other adventurers didn't trust this man, but Alan just smiled, reminding them he was an official merchant with credibility. Rise considered this for a moment, deciding it was time to test the waters, declaring that as a merchant for Matilda, he better not sell them anything strange, and he simply closed his eyes with a knowing look, accepting her terms. She then asked him to prepare food and cooking utensils for the entire camp, and the merchant happily agreed, promising to take care of everything for them. Rise realized that even invoking Mathilda's name didn't faze this man at all, so she decided to entrust the entire meal preparation directly to him. Though a dark thought crossed her mind that if he tricked them, he'd be the meal. She handed him the guild paperwork, asking him to handle the transaction for now, and requested a detailed receipt and the change once everything was settled. The merchant's smile widened as he understood the arrangement perfectly, eagerly accepting the task as a test of his skill and reputation, so Rise simply told him they had no dietary restrictions whatsoever. She then warned him that her flock were very big eaters, so he better deliver. And Alan happily agreed, even offering to provide his own cooks for the occasion, adding that it was all part of the service, with a knowing sly smile before giving a polite bow as he prepared to take his leave from them. Rise watched silently as the mysterious merchant walked away from their camp, but she couldn't shake the feeling that his eyes were probing her the entire time. Before long, a massive outdoor kitchen was set up, and bustling with activity, where one of the chefs, a blindfolded man, called out that his dish was ready, while another frantically directed the staff to serve the food immediately. The children took their first bite and were immediately blown away by the flavor, joyfully asking for more as Rise watched them with a happy, warm laugh. One of them stuffed its face, completely lost in the delicious meal, as the taste was like a sparkling, magical experience for all of them, and another rolled on the ground in pure ecstasy, overwhelmed by the sensation. Soon a long line formed as they all demanded refills from the stunned chefs. Their eyes wide with a desperate hunger, demanding more food right now, and Alan returned with more supplies, smiling at their incredible appetites. The feast was in full swing, with everyone celebrating the incredible food, when one of the little ones approached Rise with a heaping plate of food, offering it to her with a happy smile as Rise thanked the child gratefully. She was just so relieved to see them all full of energy and happiness again. But nearby, the adventurer Cruel was watching Rise with tears in his eyes, sobbing uncontrollably into his cup as he was overcome with emotion, crying that whenever he tried to pet the children, they gave him a disgusted look, and he wailed in despair, asking why they seemed to hate only him. Rise asked if he really loved her children that much as one snuggled close, and she looked at him with a slightly flustered, thoughtful expression before suggesting that maybe he was just not very good at petting them. This simple revelation completely shattered him, and he begged to practice, before collapsing to the ground in utter despair as the others just watched. A hand gently patted one of the children's backs, asking if it was all right, and the little one turned around, looking up with a curious expression, only to see Cruel, who was now being comforted by the child's soft touch. The child explained that he was a friend who loved to sing with good rhythm, and Cruel was completely overwhelmed by this kindness, calling him Lord Rhythm, before collapsing once more, this time completely overcome with joy and relief. Soon the entire party was passed out from all the food and drink, when a new arrival, Matilda, asked Rise if she was having fun offering a drink, and joked about a drinking contest, but Rise noted another adventurer just got sick. Matilda just smiled, saying it was the right call to finish her work early before she challenged Rise, declaring herself the best drinker in the town. She handed Rise a cup, thanking her for everything she had done for them, and filled a mug, telling Rise to drop the formalities and just call her by name. As she offered the drink with a warm and inviting smile, asking if the two of them weren't already friends by this point. Rise was left completely speechless, blushing at the sudden declaration, stammering that Matilda was a knight while she was just a commoner, but Matilda insisted they drink together on a first-name basis now. But then her tone shifted, becoming much more serious and direct, as she asked Rise what she thought of the town and her plans to relocate. Rise admitted she had only seen the entrance since her flock caused a stir. So Matilda explained she prepared the camp so Rise could visit again properly. Rise beamed with gratitude, though she said she wouldn't need it for a while, adding that even from the little she had managed to see of the town, everyone there had been incredibly kind to her and to her children. She had heard stories of discrimination, but this town was completely different, and Matilda smiled, knowingly agreeing with her positive assessment. She then began to explain the history of the Plark Kingdom to her, a nation bordered by the Beastren Charta Kingdom, where strength is law, and the human supremacist Nagan Kingdom, which distrusts all other races. The Plark Kingdom was founded by outcasts from both of those nations, which made Rise realize just how hostile the neighboring lands truly were. Matilda explained their history makes them naturally accepting of all races, pointing out that interspecies families are now quite common here, and she added that many beastmen in their country look very human-like. Before saying with a gentle smile she was sure Rise would find it comfortable. Rise closed her eyes, deeply moved, saying she was so glad this was her first stop. She was completely won over her affection for the town soaring high, and Matilda encouraged her to drink up, celebrating their new friendship. Rise happily obliged, chugging straight from the barrel with great gusto, and soon the two were locked in an intense drinking competition, but Matilda was no match for her, quickly falling to the ground. As the knight was completely wiped out, unable to continue the contest, Rise stood victorious over 3 empty barrels, joking about how weak she was. Soon the entire camp was passed out, and a lone figure walked away, revealing itself to be Alan the merchant, who had been watching them as a sinister, knowing smile played across his lips while he observed the scene, and he disappeared into the darkness, his true intentions still a mystery.